So, one of the distinctive features, as we've seen on in our previous chats, is that this model of multiculturalism that you're putting forward is one that at the heart has to be very practical, but also has to be founded on a very much a dialogue between individuals, but also between groups and so on. And I was wondering, as one of the most interesting aspects of your thought, could you say some more about how public dialogue would work in your multicultural ideal?
Yes, I think if one looks at the theories of public dialogue, or what are called theories of public reason, they all presuppose a homogeneous society, where people are broadly agreed on national goals, broadly agreed on how to conduct their affairs. So if you look at John Stuart Mill or John Rawls, I mean, there is this homogeneous public space. Now, those theories are splendid, but they come to grief when you deal with a multicultural society. Now, in that kind of society, you don't have a homogeneous public. You have publics of different kind. And therefore, the question is, how does reasoning, dialogue take place in those kinds of societies? And I would say there are 4 or 5 important things to bear in mind. First of all, I think one must start with the recognition, not that the other person is exactly like me and understands what I'm going to say, but the opposite, that the other person is quite different, his thinking is quite different, and let me not therefore jump to a conclusion. Let me understand him in his own terms. Give him a voice. Let him talk, for God's sake, instead of us talking for him. That's the first point. In a dialogue, it requires a great humility. The second thing would be the following. The ideas of one culture, one group, have to be understood by another group, and therefore there have to be what I might call conceptual translation. Translating, let's say, the liberal vocabulary into some other culture where people are not familiar with it, where they begin to understand what we are talking about. So the need for translating the idioms of one culture into the idioms of another. Through that, what is unfamiliar becomes accessible to us. The third thing would be to provide countless informal and formal spaces where people can talk and evolve a common vocabulary. So I would say that these are some of the ways in which one can talk through differences.
I mean, at the moment, so much public dialogue is done through legal or quasi-legal institutions, isn't it? Where a particular, very formal language is prioritised over every other. And we find this, whether one is from a different culture or indeed from being born and raised in a country, that you end up having to adopt a language that you're not familiar with and that you don't feel comfortable with. So it seems then this approach that you defend is going to have a wider application as well to include people. And what it does, of course, is very important, going back to this idea that it's a grassroots approach, that it moves power away from those people who set the terms of public debate, the people in the local council, the people in the law courts and so on, and it moves it then back to a more realistic and practical form of multicultural engagement or public engagement.
Sure. Yes, I think this by different groups talking to each other, translating their ideas into each other's language, and at the same time recognizing that there will be passages of incomprehension, intransigent incomprehension, where I simply don't understand what we are talking about.
So and convenient incomprehension as well.
Where I throw up my hands in air and say, look, I don't know what Professor Tyler is talking about. And then you say, look, wait a minute. Do you know how you, in your country, in your culture, you do things in this way? You're all right. This is what I do. And you try to translate your ideas into my culture so that it becomes sensitive. I'm able to comprehend it, make some sense of it. So I think in this way, where each one in a spirit of humility, constantly reaching out to the other, And through this contact that you and I talked about earlier, building up a kind of intercultural literacy,
Mm.
so that I'm instinctively, so that I should be familiar with how people in, let's say, from Asia or Africa or whatever settled in my country think, and able to understand what they are, how they organize their lives, how they understand their lives. That kind of instinctive understanding, mutual understanding, gives me a certain grip over what you are doing.
And so to achieve that, again, it fits nicely with your call for more cultural interaction, maybe through food or social events, as a way of trying to build that familiarity, because it does require a lot of many people, doesn't it?
It does indeed, and lots of spaces, lots of patience,
Yes,
and a lot of time.
Yes, and when we see so many groups seeking to heighten those distinctions and to politicise and nationalise distinctions, often both distorting their own nation, of course. You know, there's valorisation of different things, so that Britain becomes associated solely with the royal family and not with other aspects of what it is to be British, or a certain narrative taken, and it becomes then a political project on those people who are, from those people who are resisting the sorts of more inclusive and open approach that you've been arguing for. But it does seem that there is a viable alternative, the one that you've set out.
Yes, I mean, rather than impose a model of reasoning derived from a homogeneous public space onto a multicultural world, the important thing would be to look at that world and see how dialogue actually takes place. I mean, we have concrete existing multiculturally diverse societies. How do people talk to each other? How do they make some sense of each other? Even at a bus stop. I mean, there is a Polish elderly woman and there is a sophisticated middle-class British manager. How do they negotiate? How do they how do they get into the bus? How do they talk to each other, or how do they deal with each other? And in this way, you build up this kind of certain sympathy, certain sensitivity, certain degree of intercultural literacy, and all that provides you a basis on which a larger framework of public reasoning can develop. So that in the House of Lords today, for example, there are about 28 or thereabout non-white, Asian or African or other nationality peers. How do they talk to each other? How do they communicate? And I've watched it and I'm fascinated that over the years, each side has begun to know how the other thinks, what are the idioms in which it wants to communicate, and gradually developing a common language in which they converse. So I would look for a theory of public dialogue suited to an inherently differentiated society.
Yes. Thank you.